She was not supposed to be there when it broke. That is what they said afterward. The ones who needed the story to fit inside something manageable. They said she had no standing in the oath hall, no rank that warranted her presence, no wolf to mark her as belonging. They said she was a copyist, a ward, a charity kept in the keep's lower records room, and her presence at the reading of the 12th oath had been a clerical oversight, nothing more. They said the breaking was a coincidence, a flaw in the stone, an anomaly in a ceremony that had run without incident for 20 years. What they could not explain was his hand. He had reached for her. In front of 40 council members, in front of the ranking alphas of 6 border packs, in front of the frost moon burning white through the hall's high windows, the alpha king of the compact had turned from the oath stone and reached for the hand of a wolfless servant girl, and when her fingers had closed over his, the iron text of the 12th oath had burned from the stone's surface like frost touched by a flame, leaving nothing behind but clean, pale rock and 40 men who did not know where to look. 12 oaths sworn, 20 years unbroken, and the one that finally failed was the one she was holding him through. Stay with this story. You will want to know why his wolf had been silent for 3 years before that night, and what it said when it woke. It was the 847th year of the compact, and the frost moon had come early to Valdenmere. The cold arrived before the geese left, which the old women in the lower quarters read as an omen of one kind or another. Lena Arv read it as an instruction to pull the archive brazier closer to her work table, and to stop letting the ink freeze in its well before she had finished the morning transcriptions. She was not much given to omens. Records did not respond to interpretation the way omens required. They responded to accuracy, to cross-referencing, to the patience of a hand that knew the difference between a smudge and a deliberate amendment. She had been keeping the compact's oath records for 4 years, since the head archivist Tobas had gone half-blind and handed her the iron stylus without ceremony. And in those 4 years she had learned that most of the history written in this hall was written in small corrections to what someone had previously written down wrong. She had no pack name. The register listed her as Lena, Ward, no blood affiliation, taken in year 829 when the keep's charitable intake had been running at capacity, and the steward had needed someone to sort the overfull lower archive. She had been 9 years old and able to read, which was enough. She was 22 now, and the lower archive was sorted, cross-indexed, and organized by oath number, date, and signatory pack. And she knew every entry in it the way a person knows the rooms of a house they have never been allowed to leave. Marin brought her porridge at the 7th bell, same as every morning, the bowl wrapped in a square of wool to keep it warm down the corridor. Marin was the keep's seamstress keeper, a broad woman with gray at her temples and a directness that other servants found unsettling and Lena found essential. She had been the first person in Valdenmere to learn Lena's name, and she had never addressed her as anything else. She sat with Lena most mornings for a quarter bell while Lena ate, saying nothing complicated, and the warmth of that silence was the closest thing Lena had to a morning ritual that did not involve ink. "The council convenes tonight," Marin said, setting the bowl on the corner of the work table where there were no papers. "The 12th oath is to be read." Lena did not look up. "I know. I copied the reading text. You'll be in the hall. As a record witness." She dipped the stylus. "I won't be seen." Marin was quiet for a moment. Lena had learned that Marin's silences were rarely empty. "Be careful with what you notice," she said at last, and left. Lena notated the morning's correction log and tried not to think about what that meant, because she was already thinking about it, and the notation did not improve for the distraction. She had noticed the first discrepancy 11 weeks ago. It was small enough that a less careful hand would have filed it as a copying error and moved on. The 12th Oath's original draft, filed under Brand's personal seal, listed the granting clause differently from the copy that had been distributed to the Border Pack Alphas for review. The distributed copy said that the succession bond would be politically confirmed. The original said, politically compelled. One word. In oath language, the difference between confirmed and compelled was the difference between a king who had chosen and a king who had been forced. And if the oath had been sworn under compulsion, then under compact law it had no binding force at all. She had said nothing. She had copied the discrepancy into a separate record, filed under a cipher she kept in her memory and nowhere else, and she had gone back to work. Then she had found the tonic records. The king's physician's notes for the past 3 years listed a grief tonic administered twice daily, prescribed following the loss of the Northern Campaign. The formula in the notes was standard, the formula being logged by the household dispensary, which she had access to because the dispensary inventory cross-referenced with the Keep's budget ledger was not. There was an additive she did not recognize by name. She spent 2 weeks sourcing it in the lower archive's medical texts, which were organized by application rather than substance, which meant reading the application index twice. Greystone extract, listed in 2 texts predating the current compact by a generation, both written in the context of pack transit and prisoner management. A suppressant. Given in sustained low doses, it did not incapacitate, did not mark the body, produced nothing a physician would call a symptom. It simply quieted, made the wolf go still, and made the host unable to recognize things the wolf would have recognized. Things like a fated mate. Things like a fraudulent oath sworn through a will too suppressed to resist. She had been the one delivering the tonic. Bran's household had given her the duty 4 months ago, a small addition to her morning rounds, and she had not questioned it because she was not the kind of person anyone expected to question anything. She was a ward, a copyist, a wolfless charity, and she carried the tonic to the king's anteroom each morning where she left it on the carved side table, and she had never once spoken to him directly, and he had never once looked at her, and she had told herself that was simply the shape of her life in this keep. She had stopped delivering the tonic 3 weeks ago. She had not told anyone. She had replaced what went to the table with plain willow bark tea, the same color, the same smell once the ginger was adjusted, and she had returned each morning to perform the motion of a woman delivering a tonic, and she had waited. The anteroom where she set the tonic was small and cold, lit by a single sconce near the south door. She had been in it 43 mornings by the time she stopped. She had never seen him there. The carved side table was always empty when she arrived, and the previous day's vessel was always gone, and she set the new one down and left without making a sound, because that was the arrangement, and she was constitutionally unsuited to deviating from arrangements without a documented reason. The documented reason was Greystone. The Greystone records. Once she had found them and confirmed them, and cross-referenced them against the dispensary ledger twice to be certain, were the clearest case she had built in 4 years of archive work. A fraudulent oath. A king kept below the threshold of recognition by a slow poison disguised as grief. The knowledge sat in her like a stone in a river, cold and still, and everything moved around it. She noticed the change in him the way she noticed changes in records. By what was different from the week before? He came to the archive. Not to the upper archive where the senior historians worked in the heated wing with their proper lecterns and their comfortable lamplight, but to the lower records room, her room, at the 14th bell on a Tuesday, when the hall was largely empty. She had been cross-referencing the Oathstone transcriptions against the signatory log, and she heard the step in the doorway before she saw who it was, and when she looked up, the air in the room changed in a way she could not account for. Not louder or darker or colder, simply heavier. As if something that had been absent from it for a long time had returned, and the room was adjusting. He was tall enough that the doorway's carved lintel sat at the level of his collarbone. He wore no crown in the lower keep, only a heavy dark cloak with the compact chain at the collar, and there was a quality to the stillness of his hands that she had noticed once in a wolf she had seen at the edge of a winter field, absolute and attentive, waiting for something to confirm what it had already begun to suspect. His face was weathered the way northern stone is weathered, not old, but long exposed, and there was something behind his eyes that she could not name directly, and so she did not try. He looked at her, not at the room, not at the shelves or the ledgers or the work she had spread across the table. At her. "The archivist?" he said. "Yes, my Lord King." "What is your name?" In 4 years, no one in this hall had asked her that. She held the stylus carefully and told him. Something shifted in his face. The stillness changed quality, became something she might have called recognition if she had let herself use that word, which she did not. She told herself it was simply that he had a good memory for people who served him, that he was cataloging her as a resource, that the way his gaze moved over her face and then held was administrative and nothing else. She was practiced at this kind of telling herself. He crossed to the work table. He stood beside it closer than the space required, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, which was not unusual. He was a large man in a cold room, and cold rooms made warmth detectable from short distances. He looked at the transcription she had been working on and did not speak for a long moment. The morning brazier was between them, too small to explain what she was feeling along her left side where he was standing. "This is the Oathstone transcript," he said. "The copy, yes. The original remains on the stone until after the reading ceremony." His hand moved to the corner of the parchment. Her stylus was resting at the same corner. When his fingers came to rest a thumb's width from the end of the stylus, the heat that moved through her hand was not administrative. It was precise, specific and sudden, like a spark drawn from a winter door latch, and she felt the catch of it all the way to her wrist, and she did not move her hand. Neither did he. For the span of 3 breaths they were both still, and she was aware of her heartbeat in the specific mortifying way a person becomes aware of a thing they cannot slow. Then he lifted the parchment, read it, set it back down. "You copied this personally," he said. "All the oath transcriptions come through me, my Lord King." He was quiet. Not the performing kind of quiet, not the silence of someone assembling the next careful sentence. The quiet of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had just recognized, against his intent, that the weight of it was registering on another person. He left without another word. She sat for several minutes without moving the stylus, and then she made a notation in her private cipher about the date and the exchange, because she catalogued what she noticed, and she could not afford to stop noticing simply because what she was noticing had started to cost her something. He came back the following morning, and the morning after that. He did not announce his purpose, and she did not ask for it. He came at the 14th bell and sat at the corner of the work table that was not covered in papers, and he did not ask her to perform the nothing she usually performed in the presence of authority, which was what every room in this keep had trained her to perform. He looked at whatever she was working on and sometimes asked a question that was a real question, not a test. "What is the scope of the discrepancy in the year 840 transfer records? Why does the border compact of year 831 reference a clause that does not appear in its base document?" He asked the way a person asks when they actually want the answer, and she answered in the same register, and the air in the room during these exchanges was something she did not have an archival category for. On the 3rd morning, she looked up from the records and found him watching her with the quality of attention she had previously only assigned to the Winterfield wolf. Still and absolute and pointed entirely at one thing. She had looked down again before she could read what it meant. She was afraid of what it meant. She was afraid of what it meant in the specific way that a person is afraid of something they have wanted quietly for long enough that wanting it has become load-bearing, and she could not afford for it to collapse. She found the copied record missing 2 days later. Not the original. The original was still on the stone, would stay there until the ceremony. The copy she had made of the discrepancy, filed under her cipher, was gone. The folder was present, the cipher tab intact, and the interior empty. Someone had known her system and known exactly which folder mattered. She sat with this information for an hour before she allowed herself to think its full shape. Brand had someone in the archive, or Brand had come himself, and Brand knew she had been looking. Brand came to the archive that evening. He came alone, which told her as much as anything he said would. He was a compact man with a steward's carefully maintained posture, the kind of face that wore pleasantness as a professional tool and wore it well. He stood in the doorway and did not cross the threshold, which she thought was interesting. "I understand you have been reviewing some of the older oath materials," he said. "My regular duties, steward." "Your regular duties involve the transcription log. They do not involve supplementary copying of documents under private cipher." He let that settle for a moment. "I have been responsible for this keep's records administration for 11 years. I have significant experience identifying when a minor staff member is accumulating material above her station." She looked at him with the expression she kept for moments when her body knew something she could not let her face show. "I sometimes make working notes for complex cross-references. I wasn't aware that required notification." "The reading of the 12th oath is in 2 days," he said. His pleasantness had not moved, which meant it was not pleasantness. "You are required as a record witness. Conduct yourself within those requirements, and we will have no further conversation about your methods." He looked at her coat, hanging on the peg by the door. Not for long. Just a glance, the kind of glance that confirms a location and intends you to know it confirmed. Then he left. She waited until the footsteps receded down the corridor, which took longer than it should have because he moved slowly, which was also a communication. Then she sat very still for a moment and calculated what she had and what she had lost. The copied record was gone. The Greystone documentation still lived in the dispensary ledger, but Brand had access to the dispensary. The Veth reference in the tonic texts still lived in the lower archive, but Brand had access to the lower archive now that he knew she had found something in it. What she had was memory, what she had committed to cipher, and what she had not yet found. She worked through the night. She did not recreate the missing copy, because Brand was watching for that. Instead, she went deeper than she had ever needed to go, into the oldest intake folders, the ones predating the current compact by 60 years, indexing by instinct because the deeper archive had never been properly organized, and she was working by lamplight with the oil burning low. She was looking for a name, Veth. She had found it twice in the Greystone research texts, in a marginal notation she had not had time to follow. She found it in the 63rd box, behind a folder marked Inactive Bloodlines. The Veth were a healer's lineage, 7 generations documented in the compact's own records, possessing what the oldest text called the Voiding Gift, a hereditary capacity. Not trained, not deployed as a weapon, not particularly dramatic in the texts that described it. Simply a body that, when in sustained physical contact with the source of a false or coerced magical contract, drew the corruption out. The texts described it as a settling, like sediment clearing from water when a disturbance stops. The last Veth registration was dated year 823. A woman named Arva, occupation listed as seamstress keeper, taken into the keep's charitable intake that same year. No child listed in the registration. The child line entry was blank, which in intake records was not an accidental omission. It was a specific act of administrative erasure, the kind that required someone with edit authority over the original entry. Lena Arva Ward, year 829. Arva's daughter, registered under half her mother's name, her bloodline column empty. She did not have time to feel what this was. She copied 4 pages by lamplight and hid them in the lining of her winter coat, and went to find Maren. Maren was not in her room. The seamstress quarters were dark. The corridor outside held 2 of Bran's household men, standing with the particular stillness of men who had been told to stand there and were doing so. The reading was in one day. She understood that the window she had been working within had just closed. They came for her at the second bell. 2 of Bran's household arrived with a warrant signed by 3 council elders. Lena Arv, ward, detained for examination on charges of falsifying oath records. They did not give her time to take her coat. One of them took it from her arm at the cell door, and she heard the lining crinkle, and she said nothing, and stood straight, and let them take it. The cell was in the lower north wing, cut into the keep's bedrock. Cold in the way that stone is cold when no warmth has reached it in months, when the cold has moved through the rock over generations and settled. She sat on the pallet and listened to the bells and counted them, which was what she did when her body wanted to collapse inward. Counting was external. Counting kept the perimeter of herself defined. Maren was somewhere in this building, possibly another cell, possibly simply moved to different quarters, kept from the reading, managed rather than arrested because arresting a seamstress keeper required a more visible warrant. Corvath was somewhere in this building. Brand had told him, she was nearly certain, that she had confessed to the falsification, that the records had been secured, that the ceremony could proceed. And tonight, Brand would send a dose of Greystone in the King's tonic, just enough to push his wolf back below the threshold of recognition for the duration of the reading, and the 12th oath would be confirmed before 40 witnesses, and the false succession contract would be locked into the compact's record by morning. 3 weeks of clean tonic. His wolf awake at the edges of awareness, which was why he had come to the archive, which was why he had stood a thumb's width from her stylus and not moved. 3 weeks of clean tonic and now 1 dose before the ceremony, carefully administered, and the gap would hold. She knew the keep the way she knew the archive, entirely, because she had indexed it. The lower north wing connected to the maintenance passage behind the oath hall, through a corridor so narrow and poorly lit that it appeared in the maintenance ledger as a coal chute modification from year 791, and in no other official document. She had catalogued it in her second year when she had been reorganizing the maintenance inventory, because she catalogued everything she found. The coal chute door's key was on the keyboard in the archive records room, hung on a hook labeled with its inventory number, which she had assigned when she reorganized the board in year 843. She had not been given the key at her arrest. She had been given a cell. What she had was the wax impression she had pressed 3 weeks ago against the lock mechanism on the afternoon she had first understood what she might need, which was when she had found Arva's registration and read the blank where the child line should have been. She waited until the 4th bell, when the guard outside changed. She worked the wax impression against the cell lock for longer than she would have liked. The tumblers gave. She pulled the door open without a sound, stepped into the dark of the maintenance passage, and moved. The oath hall was lit for ceremony when she reached the floor-level vent behind the dais. She could hear the reading clerk's formal register before she saw anything, and then through the narrow iron grille she could see the hall in sections. The ranked assembly with the council elders in their dark ceremonial robes, the border pack alphas standing in formal order beneath their pack banners, Brand at the right of the dais with his pleasantness in place and his hands quiet at his sides. Lady Sola in the ranked assembly, her green gown sharper than anything else in the room, watching the oath stone with the contained attention of a woman who has been told this ceremony confirms something she has been counting on. At the stone, Corvath stood with his hands at his sides. The single dose of Greystone was in him. She could see it in the compression of his stillness, the way he was holding something down in the specific manner of a man who can feel a pressure and cannot name its source. 3 weeks of clean tonic had been enough to wake his wolf to the edges of awareness, and 1 dose before the ceremony had not been enough to push it fully back. only to blur the edges, and he was standing at the threshold of a recognition his own body was refusing to let him complete. The reading clerk reached the granting clause. She pushed the iron grille open. It scraped against the stone floor. Two council members near the rear turned at the sound. She came up from behind the dais, moving fast, and Brand saw her when she was halfway across the floor, and his pleasantness collapsed into something flat and sharp, and he said, "Guards," in the voice of a man who had prepared for contingencies. Corvath turned. He had been looking at the oath stone, and then he turned, and he looked at her across 12 feet of ceremonial distance. And she watched what happened, the way she watched a discrepancy in a record become suddenly legible, the moment when the evidence arranges itself into a single clear reading. His wolf woke. She could see it in the shift of his posture, in the change from compressed stillness to a completely different quality of attention, as if everything in the room that had been background had just become irrelevant except one point. "Lena," he said. The quiet of his voice carried the length of the hall. "Guards." Brand's voice was harder now, stripped of the pleasantness entirely. "Remove the archivist, Ward. She has been detained under warrant. She has no standing in this chamber. She has never had standing in this chamber." No standing. She had no pack name, no wolf, no rank, no bloodline in any register. 4 years in this keep and 0 times her name had been spoken in this hall. She knew the count. She had kept the records. She walked to him. Not carefully. Directly, because there was not time for carefully, and she had been carefully invisible in rooms where things were done in the dark for 4 years, and she was finished with it. Corvath stepped off the dais. He came to meet her, 3 strides crossing the space between them, and he took her hand. Her right hand in both of his, the grip total and specific. Not a ceremonial hold, but a man holding on to something he had been without for longer than he had been aware he was without it. And the moment their palms came together skin to skin, the warmth that moved through her arm was not the jolt she had felt at the work table, but something slower and more complete. A settling, like sediment clearing from disturbed water when the disturbance finally stops. His wolf fired fully. The oath stone did not crack. The iron text of the 12th oath burned from its surface the way letters burned from old parchment when a flame was held beneath it. Copper bright for a moment and then gone, and the light that replaced them was cold and white and had the quality of a thing that had been waiting a very long time to be visible, and when it finished, there was no text left on the stone, and no possibility that 40 witnesses had seen something other than what they had seen. Silence. Brand moved. "This is fabrication. The girl has archive knowledge of Othinks. She has tampered with the stone. She has—" Corvath's grip on her hand did not change. He did not look at Brand. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Aldrich?" And the name carried the particular quality of a word spoken by a man who is not needed to repeat himself in 20 years of rule. Aldrich had been standing at the hall's east wall, and then he was behind Brand, and Brand's composure finished its collapse, and what was beneath it was fear, which was the correct response to what was happening. Corvath looked at her. He was still holding her hand. The grip had not changed. "You are the only oath I intend to keep," he said. She heard the words once, and then a second time with the full weight of them landing, the way a discrepancy in a record resolves when the source is finally found. She looked at his face, which was not performing anything. It was simply a man's face in the moment when the thing he had been holding down for 3 years had stopped needing to be held. He turned to face the assembly. He did not release her hand. The 12th oath was sworn under 3 years of sustained Greystone suppression, administered under Brand's direction through the Keep's dispensary. A fraudulent oath under the Compact's own statutes is void from the moment of signing, and its obligations end with it. He paused. In the ranked assembly, no one moved. Lord Dane will be examined by the council regarding his co-signature. Brand will be examined regarding 11 years of stewardship. The Veth bloodline suppression in the intake records of year 823 will be formally reviewed. Dying, in the ranked assembly, had gone the color of old parchment. Brand had not accepted the hand on his shoulder. He twisted and pulled something from his robes, and Aldrich moved with the speed of a man who has been doing this particular thing for a long time, and Brand hit the stone floor and did not rise, and the item from his robe struck the flagstone 2 feet from Lena and lay still in the torchlight. The first Border Pack Alpha went to his knee. Not because anyone asked him to, not because a command had been issued or a protocol required it. He went to his knee the way a man's body moves when it has recognized something the mind is still catching up to, and the kneel traveled through the ranked assembly in a wave that moved faster than any instruction could have moved it, one after another going down. The council elders and the Border Pack Alphas and the household seniors, all in their ceremonial arrangement on the cold flagstones, 40 witnesses kneeling before the blank oath stone, and the woman standing beside the king who had not released her hand. She had not expected it. She had planned for many things in the maintenance passage in the dark, but she had not planned for this, for the specific quality of standing before an assembly that was bending, and the feeling was not triumph. It was quieter than triumph. It was the feeling of a record that has been incorrect for a long time finally being corrected, which was not a dramatic feeling, but a real one. Lady Sola was looking at the blank stone with the expression of someone watching a foundation go. She was not kneeling. She was standing very still in the ranked assembly with both hands at her sides, and the careful posture of a woman who had been counting on a particular outcome and was recalculating in real time. Lena did not look at her for long. Lady Sola's recalculation was her own to do. One of the Border Pack Alphas said from his knees, in the formal address, "The compact has not had a true mate bond recognized in 12 years. Corvath looked at the man. It will not be another 12. Marin was found in a supply room in the lower east wing, locked but unharmed. She came through the door Aldrich opened with a key and looked at Lena's face and was quiet for a moment in the specific way she was quiet when she had already known something and was simply confirming it. "Well," she said, "there it is." She put her hand briefly on Lena's arm, just once, the way she had done in the archive on cold mornings when the porridge was late, and the brazier was low, and the world was being difficult about warmth. It was the same gesture. It did not need to be a different one. Lord Dane offered 3 names before the council examination finished its first session. 2 were members of the physician's household who had maintained the Greystone supply across 3 years. The third was Brand's predecessor, 6 years dead, whose erasure of the Veth child line notation had initiated the entire chain. Brand's examination took longer. 11 years of stewardship produced 11 years of records, and Lena understood the examination process in enough detail to know that it would not be finished quickly or quietly, and that this was appropriate. The Veth suppression reversal was carried before the council in formal session. The 4 pages from her coat lining had been recovered from the cell where Brand's household had left them, and they were presented alongside the original intake register entry for Arva and the deliberately blank child line that followed it. The council elder who had called her an archivist ward, without standing in the oath hall on the night of the ceremony, signed the reversal document and did not meet her eyes, which was the most he was capable of, and she accepted it as sufficient. Corvath held the recognition ceremony in the oath hall before the same assembly that had knelt. He stood at the blank oath stone, which had been cleaned but not recarved, which was his instruction and which Lena thought was precisely correct. A stone that had held a false oath should not immediately hold another inscription. It should stand clean for a time. Let the air in the room settle around the absence before writing something new into it. He stood at the blank oath stone and spoke in the exact declarative register that she had learned was not coldness but precision, the register of a man who considered words to have consequences and chose them accordingly. The ward register for Lena Arv is closed, he said. She holds the Veth lineage in full recognition under the Compact's records. She is the Compact's recorded mate bond and will be addressed accordingly. He did not ask the assembly whether they found this acceptable. He informed them of the record, which was what she would have done. In the archive that evening, she opened a new notation category. She had thought carefully about the heading and settled on the formulation that a future archivist could understand without ambiguity, which was her standard for everything she wrote. She was still at the work table when Corvath came to the door at the 14th bell, as he had done twice before, and the air in the room changed in the way she had learned to expect when he entered it. She did not look up. "You did not have to come to the oath hall. I had considered that you might not." "Yes. I had a contingency." "I know," he said. "I found the maintenance corridor on the morning ledger." She set the stylus down and looked at him. He was in the doorway with the cloak dark from the cold outside, and the chain off and his hands at his sides. And he was not performing anything, which was what he looked like when there was nothing between him and what was actually in the room. He crossed to the work table and sat at the corner where Maren always set the porridge bowl. She turned the transcription log toward him so he could see the heading she had chosen, because it was his archive too, and she believed in accurate record-keeping. The heading read, Veth Recognition, Year 847, Frost Moon. He looked at it for a moment. Then his hand came to rest beside the log. Not on it. Beside it. The same thumb's width that had been the first notation in a record neither of them had written down yet. She set her hand next to his, and the archive was quiet around them, and outside the keep, the frost moon held its cold position in the sky, and the oath stone in the hall above them was still clean and pale and entirely empty, and she thought that this was precisely what it was supposed to look like when something false had finished burning away, and what remained was simply what had always been true.